understand, these men separate that. And these men, like Lefty, he was not a psychopath or a sociopath. He was old school mafia, maybe 2 or 3 years older than my father. And that's why I keep saying it's a tribal mentality.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast. Your father is such an interesting character from his early days. What I love the most is how he met your mother.
Yes.
I mean, this is the swagger on this guy. Yeah. That he must have been, his confidence level, which is always the most attractive to women, must have been through the roof. Because I want you to tell everybody a little bit how your mother and father met. It's
a short little story. So my dad was already established in the rackets, and I didn't know him, obviously, in the 40s, but he had a lot of charisma, tailored suits, and all of that. And he was to be married that Saturday. This was like a Tuesday or Wednesday to his childhood sweetheart, Anna. And my mother and my Aunt Vi were walking down Bloomfield Avenue. And, you know, Bloomfield Avenue was like Main Street, USA.
Yeah, exactly.
And all the shops and everything.
It was safe back then.
Yes, it was safe. And so my father was coming out of one of the clubs. And my aunt and my mom were just walking by at that time. And he kind of bumped right into them, and he bluntly said to my mother, "Hi, you know, how are you girls doing," or whatever. And then he said, "I'm getting married Saturday, and I can't get out of it. But when I get back, I'm going to give you a call. Could I have your number?" And my mom, and there were party lines then. And, you know, my grandpa was an immigrant, so they did have a phone, but I don't know how many were on party lines, you know. And so my mother gave the number. My Aunt Vi, the more conservative, couldn't believe it, as I've heard this story over the years. And he couldn't wait. He called from his honeymoon with Anna in Virginia Beach, my mom. And they spoke on the phone. And when he came home, they started their 14-year affair. Wow. My mother was 20 and 44. And my father was almost 30.
The swagger on somebody to do that. And you're
or speaking Italian, the cojones.
And for your mother to accept the dynamic is a very interesting thing too. So it speaks to how magnetizing his personality must have been.
It speaks to also how I think my mother was not your typical. So I'm more traditional than my mom. And she was born in 1924. So she was a rebel.
I love it how when the older generation says, "Oh, you kids, I never did anything." Bullshit.
They did everything.
They did everything.
No, my mother liked what she saw. I said to my aunt...
So she just wasn't window shopping for clothes.
No.
Yeah, she was. She liked the suit he was wearing.
Yes. And Barney Google's, Barney Zarro, famous Barney Google's Pizzeria in the North Ward, not too far away from the Belmont, back in the day. And God rest Barney's soul, we had dinner at the Belmont maybe 3 or 4 years before he passed. Chicken Savoy, beeps, you know, the usual. You know, and you get yelled at by the waiters if you ask for something.
I was actually asked to go to get Chicken Savoy tonight.
Were you?
At the Belmont. Yeah, a couple of my friends went over there, and I'm like, I can't go. I got the podcast.
We could have did it there. So.
Yeah, we could have did it live from the Belmont.
There you go.
So Barney, he was 92, and we're at the Belmont, and I'm sitting next to him with other people, and he says to me, I guess this was around 2016, and he says, "Your mother was so goddamn gorgeous." He said, and only a guy like Larry could get her. He said, but she was so conceited. She wouldn't look at me. She thought, pizza? You're coming home with flour? So my mother knew she was very pretty.
So your mother and father have this 14-year,
yes.
Let's call it what it is. It's an affair.
It's an affair.
Was there obviously your mother knew about your father's first wife. Did the first wife know about her?
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
it's perfectly acceptable.
No.
I don't.
So
Let's get that
It's
straight.
so foreign to the way.
So my
Did you ever
father,
watch The Sopranos?
I did, but they're all
Carmela
hidden.
and Tony. So my father, he saw a beautiful woman, and he went on his honeymoon, called my mom, came home with Anna. They moved into their home in Newark, and he was doing quite well. He was probably doing the counterfeiting, and he was buying up houses. He had owned about 7 houses. I'm assuming they were in Anna's name. And he had a big tattoo, even at 99 on his deathbed, Anna, at the Sailor Girl. And my mother didn't care. She did not care. She liked what she saw. My father had money, so they were not going to the neighborhood restaurant. They were going to the Copa. They were going to the Stork Club. They were, the Vesuvius in Newark was not owned by Lenny Restaino at the time. It was owned by Don DeDonna. And it was a major place. And they were going to all these major places. But beyond that, they were just love struck, I really think. They were just love struck. They were practically the same person. And they carried on their 14-year affair. Did Anna confront her? Yes. Did Anna throw out my father? Yes. And he would go to my Aunt Jenny's, his sisters, and Uncle Emil, go back home in a few days. But he carried on.
This is not your normal Gumad situation. This is somebody. If you're staying with somebody for 14 years, there's well beyond an
There's got to be
attraction.
feelings there.
No. And my mom, so of course you don't discuss everything with your children, and nor should you. And I'm a teacher, so don't. So I'm telling you that. So I did say to my mom one day when I was like 18, I said, "What did you do for 14 years?" And she said, "You have to understand. Daddy and I were together a lot." She said, "I concentrated on us. It had nothing to do with Anna." So she compartmentalized. On top of that, she said to me, and one year I just got very annoyed with him because we were doing our Christmas Eve at 10:30 like we usually do, because he was with his family, my aunts and uncles, and Anna Curcio's family, doing the family thing, right? And my mother said, "Well, I'm not going to wait till 10:30 this year. So to go to the Vesuvius or the Red Devil." So she asked my aunt, Millie, sister-in-law, Uncle T, my uncle's wife, and they had, no children yet, but they were married. She said, "Let's go to Florida." They got on a train. They went to Florida. They went to Miami. They stayed at the Fountain Blue or one of the hotels like the Fountain Blue. I can't remember if she said the Fountain Blue or not. She said, but it was very, elite. And that's what they did. And she said to my father, "I'm going to Miami. You want to
See
pick
you
me
later."
up at 10:30?" And Millie and her went. My aunt. So I'm sure there were fireworks.
She had some rebellion. She had some rebellion in her.
My mom was very rebellious for the day. And I think even for now, I would not approve of my daughter going out with a married man in the Mafia to boot.
Yeah.
Eventually, obviously, that marriage ends and your parents stay together,
Yes.
which I'm hoping you're the product of. And you get born into this lifestyle that you couldn't possibly fathom at a young age.
I didn't ask for it.
You didn't ask for it. You didn't ask to be born. Nobody does. And you just think that this is the way that it is. When was the first time that you have a conscious memory of, okay, something's
Your family's different from other families.
My family's different. It's kind of going back to where we went, where
So
we
you
ended up.
asked me that. So
Yeah.
I kind of gathered it. I would go to other houses. Rutherford was a walking town.
Yep.
You ride your bike to your next door neighbor, right? So I would go in their house at 5 in kindergarten.
But you saw things that you had to keep to yourself, and that's kind of where I was going.
Yes, but I'm saying, so I was like, oh, there's cash all over my house, and the way my parents, they used to deliver drugs and liquor back in the day from the pharmacy in Lyndhurst. I think it was People's Pharmacy. Mr. Lavagetta, was back in the day.
Does everybody over there have a vowel at the end of their name?
Yeah, back then they did. Yeah.
So I was internalizing it, but I didn't say because this was my norm. But in 65 or 66, whenever I started kindergarten, it was an ordinary morning, and the door, there was a big thud, and FBI men came and they knocked the door in, And they had warrants, and I don't know if they had a subpoena, but they had warrants. And my mother was not one to play nice or ask for coffee or any of that. She was in her bra and her girdle and pulling up her stockings, and they had come in, and she threw something on. And I remember my dog Cindy barking at them and going for their ankles, terrier. And
Fear, chaos.
yeah. And I was crying, and I was scared, and I was 5. So I didn't know what was going on. And there was 3 of them, and 2 were searching, and 1 was making the way back to the bedroom. And my father was on the end of the bed walking down, had his robe on, and said, let my wife put on her house coat and take care of my daughter, bring her to the kitchen. Okay. So 1 was already sitting at the kitchen table. So I didn't know what they were doing. We got back to the kitchen. All of the cabinet doors were open. Things were on the floor. My mother didn't say one word.
I'm sure your mother was prepped for this day.
Oh, yeah.
Well, she was prepped from when she met my father.
Right.
So.
Well, your father probably had that conversation. Listen, if this happens,
Yes.
this is how you act.
So my mother was a rebel, but she was also a dichotomy, don't forget, because she was complicit.
I used that term in my opening, and you think it's
What term?
Dichotomy.
Dichotomy.
Oh.
And they had to look it up.
So she was complicit too. And she also was, marriages, I've got your back.
Well,
Right?
yeah.
So she had his back. So she knew his contact book was.
In today's terms, she would have been arrested under RICO.
Yeah,
So there was no
exactly.
RICO yet.
RICO was
Exactly.
74.
70 or 72, because my father was indicted again in 69.
That was the one I read where he was indicted with DeCarlo.
Yeah, they were all indicted
Yeah.
for interstate gambling and all of that. But so that morning, so that was my introduction. So my father kept a little black book with all the contacts in the sugar bowl or by the sugar bowl. And my mother just, went over, poured a cup of coffee, put it in her girdle. I didn't know what was going on. The dog's barking. They're tearing the house apart. My father's in the bathroom, of course, doing his French cuffs and putting on his cologne and
So your
taking a
father's
shower.
he's not even phased.
Oblivious to it all.
And he comes out, and my mom says, when he comes out, my mom says to the guys, I'm taking my daughter to school, so I need to take her to the bathroom and clean her up. You could show yourself out. And my father says, well, I have to go down Newark with them. And I remember my father looking at me, and he said, I'll be back this afternoon. I have to go down Newark, and because he knew I knew Newark, with these nice men. These are my friends. And I'm thinking, friends?
They just ruined the
and
house.
I'm crying, And so and he says, I'll see you later. We'll go to Lyndhurst Park, my favorite park. So my mother says to me, come on, let's go in the bathroom. I put on my little jumper, did my hair, washed my face. We get in the car, we go to Sylvan Street. I was only there for 1 year. That's where the kindergarten children went, and then they went to their other schools.
Sylvan School.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Rutherford. So she says to me, it was a busy morning. And I said on the way, I couldn't articulate it, but I knew this wasn't right. And I said to her on the way to school, who were those men? I knew they weren't friends. And she says, they had the wrong house, Angelo. Daddy had to go down Newark to explain it.
Mm.
And then we got in, and she said to the principal and to my teacher, we had a very, very busy morning. So Angela's a little late, but, she's fine. She's had breakfast and everything. And that was it. And I think, as I recall, that's probably when my knots started in my stomach, because I knew something was wrong.
Like I said, kids have I said it earlier.
Second sentence.
Kids know when an important person walks in the room. They just know it. You don't have to tell them. And you knew, just like you knew this wasn't right, and it affected you internally. And it's one of the downsides. As much as your father was, and I've read a lot about your father in here, he was a doting father. He was very, it's counterintuitive to what most people who we know think about the mafia lifestyle. These are, because I grew up with these guys. So they're fathers, they're coaches, they're everything. And they're also some bad men sometimes, but they have families. They care for their children just like everybody else.
Right. So they're not. So I want to make this clear. In the mafia, there are psychopaths and sociopaths. My father used to say to me when I was about 14, every single day, if I smile the wrong way, if I'm in a room with a sociopath, I could die. So he had that human nature thing down, but that was the minority. And if you were an enforcer, didn't mean you were a sociopath, and it didn't mean you were a psychopath. It meant you were to kill because you were ordered and you accepted that position, and people signed up
One of the best
to be killed.
One of the best examples I've heard from the book that your father was friendly with was Lefty Two Guns Ruggiero.
Yes, who killed.
Who killed. But from
And
everything,
I loved him.
Isn't that something
God.
else?
Well, you compartmentalize. You have to understand, these men separate that. And these men, like Lefty, he was not a psychopath or a sociopath. He was old school mafia, maybe 2 or 3 years older than my father. And that's why I keep saying it's a tribal mentality. When you sign up for this, it's tribal. You don't cross the family. You do your job. You have to learn to speak a certain way. You have to learn to talk a certain way. Most people that want to go up the ladder will start as not a capo's driver. Capos don't really have drivers, but an underboss, a street boss, a front boss, driver. They open the door for you, that kind of thing. And you may not know to do that. You better know who you're reporting to.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's tribal. Lefty was an enforcer at one point, but he was not a psychopath or a sociopath.
See, I say all the time, like any business, and even the mafia, which is really a business.
That's what I said. Yeah.
It's like a body. Every part has its thing to do. You know, it has its job. It has its purpose. It's the same way any business is. Same way the mafia is. You know, you got the brains, then you got the arms, you know, and then you got everything else.
So to put this into context with everybody, what you just said was so very important because I'd heard this was described to me this way. The downfall of the modern Italian mafia
today
has a lot to do with nepotism. Bosses are putting their kids in high-level positions that they didn't earn. To put it in our world, so in police departments, they will have other cops transfer, family members, friends, whatever, nepotism. It's 100% nepotism. And they'll come in there, and they'll come in at high salaries, and what it does to the lower rank and file is it kills morale.
Yeah.
And it killed morale in the mafia. John Gotti, I heard this about John Gotti. He puts Junior into a high-level position, which he didn't earn. He didn't work his way up. He didn't learn the etiquette that you were just talking about. And what happens to the rank and file? Well, screw him. He didn't earn anything, so I'm just going to dime him out. I'm going to rat him out. And that's what they did. So that puts it in context. Just think of whatever you're doing in your current life, and somebody gets a job they don't deserve, you're going to resent them.
So Carmine Persico he had his brother, Allie Boy, but then his son, Allie Jr., and then there was Theodore, and, so the Persicos, Carmine was to some extent guilty of that. And
well, he was also guilty of hiring Greg Scarpa.
Yes. and my father knew Carmine from way back. And my father's story, we used to hijack milk trucks. What were we getting? Milk and eggs. And I said, Dad, why are you hijacking? He goes, my brothers and sisters needed to eat. So I'm not condoning it, but my father had no patience for legitimate work because
I think your father
It wasn't lucrative enough.
I honestly think your father wasn't fit to be a worker bee.
No. And he didn't have the patience. And like he said, there was no money for college. There was no community college.
Yeah.
You know who went to college? Wealthy families. So, but Carmine Persico was guilty of that. Today, yes, families are guilty of it. And many years ago, as I'm thinking back, lots of men I knew that were in the business, their parents were home crying that their sons got into the
Want 'em to
rackets
get
by
into
running
business.
numbers at 14.
Yep.
Because, you know, they'll so at these social clubs, at least in Newark and even in Little Italy, kids will run numbers, you know, Gigante held court on Sullivan Street. And then they're watching, right? And some are more prone to this.
Well, you see that in a Bronx Tale.
Exactly. So lots of the parents, they didn't want this. They wanted their child in a factory job. There was no money.
Well, that's another common misperception. If you grew up in an Italian neighborhood, most families did not want that life for their children.
No.
The vast majority. Unfortunately, sometimes people get taken by the streets. But you've had some run-ins. Aside from the FBI breaking down your front door when you were 5, did you ever feel in danger? Because I don't know how much you knew growing up in the teenage years when you became really self-aware of your surroundings. Mm-hmm. Did you ever feel in danger at all?
With these men?
With anybody, you know, whatever the lifestyle is.
No.
Never. That's interesting. Do you think?
And I sat down with Jamo, who was an enforcer in the 30s, and then he went all the way to Capo, and I, you know, Lefty Ruggiero and Matty Iannello, and loved Mike Sabella, loved Mike, loved Matty, loved Mike Sabella, loved Lefty, Sam DeCalvacante.
The fame. Well, that's The Sopranos. For everybody, that's who The Sopranos was.
So did I ever feel danger?
In danger.
Did I ever feel personally in danger? No.
That's insane, because the level of your father, especially not being a tough guy enforcer. I'm sure your father was tough. Let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase that. He wasn't an enforcer. They must have had some respect for him. Either that or he was a hell of an earner.
So growing up, if you were to ask me right now, one word that your father taught you, and he taught me many lessons. He taught me to produce. He was a producer. He was an earner. And he used to say, Angela, you have to produce.
You hear that, Andrew? You have to produce.
Have to produce.
Now,
So,
was there any kind of, I don't want to say fear, but like when your father went out at night, you knew the life he was living. And that's what we were saying. That's why parents didn't want their kids to get into it.
I didn't like cops.
What are you doing
I've
here?
heard this before. And
I don't like, and do I like cops now? So cops have to do their job, and I respect police officers. Do I like cops personally? Because I do compartmentalize. No, I don't like what they did. I don't like how they treated me, including FBI. Like going into high school, driving my car, they're sitting in a drab sedan. They're not supposed to talk to me. And they're looking at me, and this is my high school, and I'm 17, and I was made aware. These are not insurance men. And one morning, somebody says to me, "Morning, Angela." I told my parents as soon as I just swung my pocketbook was swinging and looked at these idiots, and in I went to school. Waited till I got home, told my father. He called his attorney that he kept on retainer. Said, "Jerry, she's 17. You got to go down Newark. They can't be talking to her." And if you're a cop, do your job. You don't say good morning to a 17-year-old going into school.
They're innocents in all of this, and truly are. You at 17, you had I'm sure your father really shielded you from that life.
But your question to me was when I was older and aware, like, did I feel? So I didn't feel in danger with any of these men. Even if I was sitting at the bar at, Casa Polizzi, sitting with Jamo, I'm not going to name names, but there were some men that worked out of the Belmont that were psychopaths and that were sociopaths. And if I saw them there, unlike Larry Day or other people, and not that I went in, but if I had friends I saw in there, I would park and run in. And then my father would say to me all the time, "You can go in the Belmont. I catch you at the finish line." Because the finish line was a place in Newark that the racket guys with morals didn't like the finish line guys. So, that even has a hierarchy. So no, I never felt endangered.